We are back talking vintage sports from Nedick's at the Garden on 48th Street, neither of which are with us anymore. They're long gone. Our memories persist. And we have four of us in the booth tonight who have memories of those days. Hal Bock from the Associated Press. How are you, sir?
I'm good, Ralph.
Good. And George Case III is with us. How are you doing, my friend?
Just fine, thank you.
Good. And finally, the Maven, Alan Blumkin, who knows from everything.
Not quite.
Happy birthday this week, Alan.
Thank
74
you.
years young.
Yeah, thank you.
Good. Any changes in the world that you want to note on your birthday that you didn't think would be the way it is at age 74?
Oh God, I mean, yeah. Basically, you can take almost everything that I grew up as a kid with all the technology, like pay telephones and typewriters and slide rules and all this stuff, and from what it was like then to what it is today is just incredible.
And
Alan, you and I and probably Hal, we're all the same age, and I know my grandchildren always laugh and they kid me about being a dinosaur because I say, hey, when I was a kid, we didn't have all the stuff that you guys had, but somehow we made it.
So,
we did, didn't we, George?
Yeah, compared to 10-year-old kids, I'm technologically challenged.
Oh, sometimes it's scary what they know and how they can do it, and make the computer and the computer world hum. And it's just like driving. I think if you don't learn to drive at a very early age, you're handicapped in that respect most of your life.
I didn't start to drive until I was 37, and it took me quite a while, but I figured out that it becomes mechanical. The physical becomes mechanical. It's the mental part that's the roughest. Especially when you get onto highways, and we have parkways and expressways here, and you have to be constantly alert about what everybody else on the road near you is doing. I found that to be much more difficult than the physical act.
Yeah, it's the mental and looking around, and eventually becomes second nature. And to a certain extent, we've all adjusted to the computer enough that we can do the basic things. You say we're dinosaurs, but the computer itself, the programs, the way they're set up, they're pretty user-friendly. And I think that's changed over the last 20 years or so. It's pretty hard not to be able to do anything on the computer. And, but it's changing times, and we're all adjusting. I think the big adjustment for the world is that the computer is taken away from social ability, whatever the word is, where people don't talk to each other. They message each other. They don't look each other in the eye. When they're together socially, everybody's looking down at their device and looking what's happening in the world, and that's changed us. But with that comes our topic of the evening, and that is twofold. He's Michael Jordon, we're going to talk about, and one cannot talk about Michael Jordon without talking about the advent of the brand Nike and the change in the athletic shoe wear over the years. Fortunately, we have the maven of that. George Case Jr., you worked in the athletic footwear industry for many, many years, and you saw Michael come and you saw Michael go. I'd like you to talk from the standpoint of the shoe and what he meant to that industry, and George Case III.
Well, I'll be very happy to give you a little history in the athletic footwear business. I happen to be part of that history because it changed dramatically during my career in the athletic footwear business. When I first started, I started with Pro Kids, and we barely had any market share at all when it came to athletic footwear. But I persisted and was after the parent company to really help, get some product out that was really going to appeal to the kids, and also do some promotion and marketing. And marketing has really become the keynote when it comes to athletic footwear. And you mentioned Michael Jordan. I mean, Michael Jordan and Nike go hand in hand, and the Air Jordan brand and Michael Jordan have become the dominant brand in the athletic footwear business today, where in the early 70s, when I was first in it, Nike did not even exist. And I know that's hard to believe, but Phil Knight started Nike out in Beaverton, Oregon, with the University of Oregon and Bill Bowerman and Steve Prefontaine, and they had a shoe called the Waffle Trainer, and that was how they really got their start. Went around to track meets with the shoes in the back of their car and gave them out. And then in '68 Olympics, Nike and Adidas and Puma really went after the business. Nike wasn't even there. And then a few years later, the Nike brand started to catch on. I had a representative who at one time wanted to come to work for me at Pro Kids, and he asked me if I knew anything about Nike. And I said, well, I've seen the boxes around, those orange boxes. I don't know too much about the brand. He said, well, I've got a chance to go as a manufacturer's rep. And I said, well, take it, because I don't have that kind of position available. You'd have to work for me as far as a corporate structure, and I just don't have it, where Nike is looking for some manufacturer's reps, and I think you could do well. So all of a sudden, he saw me a few years later and said, George, thank you very much for that advice. I've become a millionaire. And he took Nike from when it was very little, a very small brand, to a major American brand and now a worldwide brand. And Michael Jordan certainly had a lot to do with that.
Okay, how did Nike approach him? How did their partnership get started?
Well, I think I don't know all the details, except that Michael was a great college player at the University of North Carolina, and the way that the shoe companies worked back then, they would go, and if you had a relationship with a coach, you would talk to the coach about a certain player, and you might want that player to represent your brand. And it just so happened it was a perfect marriage, because Michael Jordan was a fantastic basketball player who was well-spoken, and that's what a company was looking for. I know that we had the same thing when I was at Pro Kids. We had Ralph Sampson when he was at the University of Virginia, and he was a key spokesperson for us, because he was very highly thought of around the country, and he was a role model, and that's the way it was with Michael Jordan. Converse was our competitor at the time. Converse had Larry Bird and Magic Johnson. They were their key players, and before that, they actually had Dr. J, Julius Erving. So all the companies were looking for that superstar athlete that could represent them on the national stage, but that had the charisma and the ability to work with kids and really develop a product around him, and that's what Nike did with Michael Jordan.
Was there one person, I guess it must have been a designer, that logo, that Michael flying through the air logo?
Right. That was their Air Jordan logo, and it was based upon, they had some film of Michael, driving to the basket, and he was so high up in the air, and they really, again, marketing is so important when it came to athletic footwear. Somebody came up with a bright idea of, let's have a logo with Michael's silhouette, and let's call it Air Jordan, and that's where it began.
Wow, incredible! It's incredible to me that manufacturer's rep, who 2 years later was a millionaire.
Yes, absolutely.
And nice the way Nike structured it, that they kind of a profit sharing, if you will, or conglomerate where the members of the team get to make some money for a change.
Well, you know what? It's interesting you said that, Ralph, because Michael Jordan probably made more money from Nike with his endorsements and the marketing and the fact that he had a share of every pair of Air Jordans that were sold. He had a percentage of it than he did with the Chicago Bulls contract.
Well,
I mean, incredible amount of money. I mean, the average fan, the average person, it's hard for them to envision. Today, you can look at, the great player today like LeBron James. I mean, he's making a huge amount of money from Nike, but the first one to make the really big dollars in the athletic footwear business, over and above the Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, Dr. J, what their earnings would pale in comparison to what Michael Jordan was making with Nike.
Wow. Let's talk about Michael as a player a little bit. Let's start with, who am I going to start with? How about you, Alan Blumkin?
Okay,
your first memories of Alan,
the one
Michael
thing that impressed me about Michael Jordan was he had a killer instinct. The competitive, he had a really killer instinct. Anybody that, thought that they could, they come out saying, well, I can stop him, I can do this, I think to him, I can do that. He'd go out and kill them on the court.
Right.
And he was one of, I guess you could put Magic Johnson and Larry Bird in there, that they were not afraid to take the last shot at the end of the game if it was needed.
He also made the players around him better.
A lot better. You're right, Hal. He made the Pippen and Grant and the guys on the Bulls quite a bit better than they would have been without him. That's what a great player does.
Well, they had the triangle going. Phil Jackson's
triangle. I mean, with or without the triangle, he would have been what he was. And if he didn't take off the 2 years to play baseball, the Houston
White Sox.
Houston Rockets won.
Chicago White Sox organization.
They would have won 8 straight championships with him.
Well, that in itself is kind of a story. There was rumors because of gambling and this, that, and the other thing that his sojourn was forced.
His father was murdered before that happened, right before that happened also.
Right.
Yeah, yes, he was.
Cheeto Francona's kid, Terry, who went on to manage the Red Sox to a championship or two, was the manager of Michael's team, AA.
The Birmingham, and they loved him because instead of traveling on the rickety old buses like they do at that level of minor league play, he bought an air-conditioned bus for the team.
Right, he's a pretty good teammate.
He couldn't hit very well.
No, he couldn't, but he didn't disgrace himself. I think he hit like 245, and that's pretty. AA ball, you hit 245 without ever having played any other organizational organized ball.
You know, in basketball, when a game came down, it was time and time again with him, where it came down to the last second of the last shot, and you knew he was going to get the ball, he was going to take the shot, and he was going to make it.
Okay.
The remarkable thing, you talked about the 2 years off of playing baseball. When he came back to the NBA, his first game was in Madison Square Garden against the Knicks. And it was as if he had never been away. He scored 55 points in his first game back. And that was a signal that Michael Jordan was still Michael Jordan. The 2 years off had not taken away, had not diminished any of his skills.
I want to mention one thing. We were talking about the shoes, and I got kind of waylaid. I had it in the back of my mind. it changed society that the Michael Jordan, the Air Jordan brand, kids were stealing from each other on the streets, taking their sneakers.
They kill each other.
And it really set up a thing in this country where we had to examine, we're spending $100 a pair for your 7-year-old kid to go to school in a pair of Air Jordans, and it really made the country look into itself a little bit and say, hey, we're on a social plane that's, where money is everything, where appearance, and this was the 90s. My kid was growing up in the 90s, and I could remember thinking, wow, it wasn't happening in Alameda where I live, but Alameda's a little island right off of Oakland and in Northern California. And there were a lot of instances where kids were being beat up, and so it was a time that we were going through that wasn't easy, and I just wanted to identify that. Hal, what was your first recollection of Michael when he came into the league? What brought it wasn't just the shoes. What made him stand out?
Well, don't forget, he hit the winning shot for North Carolina to win the NCAA championship in the Final Four. So now he moves from there to the NBA, and there was a lot of controversy about him. They wouldn't let him play. He was hurt. He wasn't hurt. And he really lost it with the management of the Bulls. He said, let me get in there. Let me go on the court. Let me play. And because he knew his own abilities, and once he got in there and once he played, I mean, he just shot to the very top, and he was an exceptional talent. And it was obvious right from the get-go. But the Bulls management held him back for a while. That's what I remember. And of course, once he got into the lineup on a regular basis and was in the playoffs that year, he really lit it up. I mean, he was a special player, and we have that. We're fortunate today to have that in a guy like LeBron James. So I would throw this out: you're at the peak of their careers. Would you draft James or would you draft Michael Jordan? Which one would you go for?
You know what, Hal, that's a great question, and I always maintained it's almost impossible to compare generations, but both of them at their prime, I mean, they controlled the game. When they would put, whatever was needed, the basket or whatever it is at the end of the game, they would go to Michael or they would go to LeBron, and they would do it. And they were complete players. They were great rebounders. They were great scorers. They were great ball handlers. And so, in my opinion, I don't think you can compare either one because they were both were great, and they were the top players in their era. And Nike was fortunate to be able to build a program around Michael Jordan, and now Nike is building a program around LeBron James.
The one thing I think should be noted about Michael Jordan, that he was drafted by a team with a major media market, and the 1984 draft is in the NBA is infamous because Portland had the second pick, and they decided to go with the injury-prone Sam Bowie over Michael Jordan.
Kansas, I think.
No, he was out of Kentucky.
Yeah, Sam was. I think Sam was like a 7-footer at the time.
Yeah, he was hurt all the time, and Portland drafted him, and he was hurt there.
Yeah. Also note that Michael Jordan was cut from his high school basketball team as a freshman or as a sophomore. And he came back from that. I mean, he said, I'll keep going, and developed into what he was. So it's just a microcosm of life a little bit. Sometimes it doesn't go easy, and success, you're not successful all your life, and you've got to step up.
Does anybody remember flack when they had the Dream Team in 1992 in the Olympics, and Adidas was the sponsor of the basketball team. And when they won the gold medal, they were supposed to wear Adidas jackets, and he had the big contract with Nike, so I think he covered the Adidas logo up.
Yeah, that's what they, Alan, that's exactly what they did during the gold medal presentation, because of the fact that they had competing contracts. The American players, Jordon, they came up with the idea of putting their warm-up jacket over top of the logo, so it would not be shown in any publicity. So, that's the crazy kind of world we're living in today, but there were so many players that under huge contracts, and the Dream Team was an example. When you have Jordon and Barkley and Magic and Bird, I mean, those great players, they all were under contract to shoe companies.
Okay. And I've got almost every football team, whether it's collegiate or professional, that has the Nike swoosh on the uniform.
Right.
I have another question for you guys. We know about, and George certainly knows firsthand, about how players in the NBA are all linked to shoe companies and uniform companies and Nike and Adidas and Puma and so forth and so on. Why is it that other sports don't have that kind of relationship? Certainly not baseball and certainly definitely not hockey and not football either. Why is it only basketball players that get these big?
Hal, can I jump in there? And I'd just like to explain the marketing that goes on with athletic shoe companies. They look at the various team sports and the various individual sports, and basketball happens to be a great sport. Indoor, the fans are up close. There's so many photographs, and there's so many players that are out there playing in a certain product that the kids notice it. And all of that marketing goes into advertising, promotional campaigns, where when it comes to football, they're much further away from the field. Baseball the same way. And the emphasis in basketball is because it is an up-close and personal sport. And the kids, when they go to a game or they watch it on television, and it's hard for us to say it because we're adults, but kids are very much influenced, and we talked earlier about peer pressure, but what the particular athlete is wearing, that's what they want to wear.
Right. Geez, that really says it all about society, doesn't it? About peer pressure and not their moves, but their moves on the court, but what they're wearing is first. They want to be like Mike because he's wearing, not because he's shooting the way he did, or this, that, and the other thing.
Well, that's what it is, Ralph. And the thing is, what the marketing people will tell you when they have focus groups and they do all kinds of stuff. I mean, I went through this for so many years that they would ask a kid, why do you want a particular brand of shoe? And they will say, well, Michael Jordan wears it, or Larry Bird wears it, or Dr. J wears it, and I want to be like them. Well, the athlete that will tell you, that doesn't really have anything to do with their ability, whether the shoe or not, but they're making a lot of money, and the marketing programs are built around that athlete, and that's the kids walk into a store and they're asking for a particular product, and that's what they're asking for. What they see on television, with a great player, what he's wearing, that's what they want to wear.
You guys must remember when in the NBA it was either low cut or high cut Converse.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, that was the only choice. I can't remember. I think Mikan wore Converse or Converse-like shoes, and I know through the Russell era, was there one company, that broke away from Converse with the NBA before Nike? Did somebody make inroads to the NBA, George?
Yes, they did, and I'll tell you who it was. There were two companies. One, first of all, Converse was named the Chuck Taylor All-Stars. Chuck Taylor had been a basketball coach in Indiana, and that's what they built their brand. Today, if you go to a school and you talk to kids, young girls have Chuck Taylor, and they're wearing it because it's become a fashion shoe, not an athletic shoe. But in the 70s, when the whole marketing started to change when it came to athletic footwear, Converse had dominated the basketball market. All of a sudden, Puma came in with Walt Frazier and the Puma Clyde, and Adidas came in with their basketball shoes, and Converse had one basketball shoe, the Dr. J, which was leather, and that's where the change went. It went from the Converse canvas shoes to leather or suede basketball shoes.
Gotcha. Okay, now here's my key question for you guys. We talked about 5 ball players today that fit into that category of absolute superstar. We talked about Bird a little bit. He's right up there. We talked about Magic. We talked about Michael, and we talked about LeBron. And you hit it right on the head, George. You can't compare players of different eras with each other. You have to only compare players of the same era playing against each other. I will ask you, does Oscar rate being right up there with those guys? And has he now gotten to the point where he's almost like not remembered as much as he should?
Well, fame is fleeting when it comes to athletes, and I can tell you, 20 years or 30 years from now, you'll ask a kid, we won't be around, but you'll ask a kid, well, who's the greatest player? And they probably will never remember Michael Jordan or LeBron James. But there are players that do transcend year after year in their remembrances, and Oscar is one of them. Elgin Baylor is another. Jerry West is another. These are great players that played, in a much earlier time, but probably could play today, although I don't think they would be the same caliber of player because they wouldn't be as quick. But
they'd have better nutrition. They'd have better
I think
training.
that's part of it, Ralph, when it comes to, just like we talked a few weeks ago about baseball. The nutrition is certainly the training, the fact that they're lifting weights and they're doing all the kinds of cardiovascular stuff that they do today, they didn't do back then. But those 3 players,
and that could be a disadvantage. The weight part could be a disadvantage in all sports. I don't know.
Basically, when Oscar and Jerry West and Elgin Baylor played, there was a limited number of teams, and I think the travel right now and the scheduling is an awful lot harder than it was back in those days.
Right. I agree with that, and also when you look at some of the players, you look at the size. I mean, you had Wilt and you had Russell. These guys, Wilt was over 7 foot. Russell was like 6'10" or whatever. Today, there's guys like Shaquille O'Neal, 7'4", 350 pounds. I mean, they're a totally different body structure than what it played in the NBA many years ago.
Hard for me to believe that Wilt wouldn't have kept up in today's generation, though. And Oscar.
I think the superstars, and I'll go all the way back to Dolph Schayes and Bob Pettit. I think Mikan could have, because Mikan was done in by a 24-second clock. But
it's interesting.
Players who were great, who were really great back then, I still think would be very useful these days.
I went to New York University at a time when Cal Ramsey was our star. Cal was 6'4", and I mean he could do everything on the court. And he got drafted at a time when all of a sudden 6'4" became a point guard. Cal was a power forward, and he could not adjust. And he never had much of a career in the NBA, even though he was a great college player because of his size. The game evolves.
Yeah.
Now, I also want to point one other thing out that's important to this conversation. George, I wore Pro Keds, and nobody ever offered me a contract to endorse them, and I resent that.
You didn't come to me. I didn't know you at the time. I would have given you $1.
Yeah, back in those days, they were sneakers.
Yeah.
They were sneakers.
Right. Or tennis shoes.
Yeah.
That's what they were called. They were called sneakers, and then it got into, they became leather basketball shoes and athletic footwear and everything else.
Back then.
Right. Yeah.
George, did they have you in on the design of the shoe itself? Did they take advice from the reps as to what was hot and what wasn't?
Yeah, they did. They did to a degree. We had what we called product managers, and they would talk to people like myself who were in touch with the players and the coaches as to what was needed. And as a matter of fact, we came up with a couple new product designs that were based upon recommendations that we had from some players and coaches. They were looking for a much lighter weight shoe, and the fact that they wanted something to give them more support, so we had to do those kind of things. I also, because of my baseball background, I mentioned, Pro Keds and Pony, but we did a lot of work in baseball. And I did have quite a bit of input into baseball shoe design because of my dad's major league career, and I knew what ball players were looking for in a baseball shoe. So it wasn't just, basketball, although that was by far our biggest product line, but I helped with input into the design of baseball as well.
Did you call on high school teams as well, George?
You did to a degree. If there was a national, I was a very close friend and worked with him, Morgan Wooten at DeMatha High School, which was one of the top programs. And then in the New York area, Hal will remember Power Memorial. We would, work with those. And Power Memorial is where, he was called Lou Alcindor then, but that's where Kareem played and was recruited by UCLA out of Power.
Right. And I remember them playing for the city championships. I think it might have been Clinton that they played with Willie Worsley, but I could be wrong on that too. Sometimes memory escapes. Did you ever call on Erasmus with Bernie Kersner?
Well, I didn't call on him personally, but I did have a rep in New York who did call on him, and that was those great teams. I mean, just like in Philadelphia, there were certain high schools in Philadelphia that we called on because they were dominant in the Philadelphia area, and they would be in New York or in Chicago or L.A. But basically, the athletic footwear companies back when I was doing it were more involved in the colleges and the pros than they were in the high schools.
Okay, and I have a question for Hal Bock. That question that I had for George has been going on in my head for a long time. For Hal Bock, did you know the Philadelphia Bocks? Are you related to Howard and Fran Bock from Philadelphia?
No. Fran is my wife. Does that help? My wife's name is Fran.
But she wasn't a Bock growing up.
No, she wasn't.
Okay. That was my camp friends, and hadn't heard you were the only two Bocks, Howard and you, and his sister. So that answers that question for me, and I'm sure there are many listeners out there saying, why do we listen to this guy ramble? Why doesn't he let his guests talk more often?
Ralph, there's one thing I want to ask Hal if he knew Frank DeFord, who just passed away the other day.
Oh, great question.
What's the question? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
No Frank DeFord at all.
No.
Did you know Frank DeFord, Hal?
Oh, of course. I'm sorry. Yeah, of course I knew of him, and I read him. I had one occasion to talk to him. I was doing a story, and I don't remember what it was about, but it needed some reference to cultural situation. And I called Frank DeFord, and he was in the middle of writing a story, and he said, "That's not a problem. Let's talk." And he was wonderful. He was just an elegant guy and a great representative of our fraternity of sports writers. I can't say that I knew him personally, but he was a terrific writer and a terrific broadcaster.
He will definitely be missed. We all grew up with Sports Illustrated. I mean, that was the consistency. Sport Magazine was monthly, Baseball Digest was monthly, but Sports Illustrated was weekly. And as far as photographic art in Sports Illustrated, you could not beat it. They had some wonderful pictures, especially in the Garden, both hockey and basketball. They did great. Thank you, gentlemen. This is a great show. Am I leaving anything out? Would any of you like to express anything before I close it out?
I'd like to talk you offline for a couple of seconds.
Okay. And Hal, is there anything you want to add to it?
No, that's it.
Okay. And George, thank you.
Well, thank you all. I enjoyed this, and I happened to sort of grew up in this athletic footwear business, so I knew a little bit about what was going on. But this was an enjoyable conversation for me.
Wealth of information on this.
Yes, absolutely. And next week, hopefully, we're going to get Henry Bibby. You're also familiar with Henry Bibby. You have stories to tell, George Case, about him. I'm learning about Henry Bibby. He was a Knick, of course.
Yeah.
And one of maybe the 11th man when they won it. But he went on to the Sixers and had a real good career. He played with Dr. J, and so we'll get to talk to him next week, I hope. And thank you, Alan. We'll talk off the air.
Yeah.
George, we will talk next Sunday. You're not going to be available?
No,
I'm going to be away. My granddaughter's prep school graduation, but the following week I'll be around, and certainly, next week we'll be back, and we'd love to talk again. And if you get Henry Bibby on, I will be happy to tell a few Henry Bibby stories that I had some personal knowledge of.
Beautiful. Thank you, guys. Talk off the air, Al. Everybody out there, keep it on, and we'll be back next week.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Good night.
Good healthy, everybody.
Yeah, Ralph.
Wait.
Ralph.
Wait, Alan. I'm trying to cut it off.
All right.
Alan, hang up. We'll call back. We'll both call back.
All right. The same number?
Same number.
Okay.